So, do you hear me?
I hear you fine.
Okay, very well. Hello, Larry. Hello, community. Larry, first of all, I would like to thank you for agreeing to this interview. My name is Alex. I'm running the Black Mountain Analysis Geopolitics blog on Substack, and I'm from Serbia. Larry, of course, don't need an introduction, but I'll go quickly through a few important facts about him. He's a CIA veteran. He worked in the US State Department's Office for Counterterrorism. He's running a consultancy where he's, for instance, training people from the US military special operations community. It is an honor to have you here, Larry.
Thank you, Alex. Good to be with you.
Thank you. So let's start. I have prepared today three major topics through which I will go step by step. It is first about the United States, then Ukraine, and then several intelligence topics.
Mm-hmm.
I will mix in several questions from my community. Okay, let's start with the United States. So the United States has a very famous constitution with a very long history. I personally consider that constitution as a very good one, and the Americans are rightfully very proud of it. Yet, as an outside observer, one would assume that there is an unelected interagency that always keeps up the same foreign policy, no matter which party is in power. Am I right with this observation? And what does that mean for the Constitution of the United States and first and foremost for the average American?
I think what we're seeing is how war transforms a country and not for the better. Um, the United States used to be a rather parochial country, and the Constitution really did hold sway. It was really considered the law of the land. Uh, what has happened, particularly in the aftermath of World War II, has been a buildup and consolidation of power at the federal level, at the national level in Washington, D.C. Because previously, under the Constitution, there were only a certain number of delegated powers to the federal government. Everything else was supposed to reside with the states. And we've seen that become something that's no longer useful. It's an antique. It's being ignored. And increasingly in the United States, the power that has been lodged within the federal government and the ability to carry out acts of aggression against other countries without a vote of the members of Congress has become almost institutionalized. So we really are. I've lived long enough to witness the transformation of America into something that bears more in common with the old Soviet Union than it does with America as a land of the free and home of the brave, as the song goes. It's very unfortunate and it is dangerous because we're seeing the persecution of political opponents in much the same way, not with the level of violence that had occurred in the Soviet Union, but it was the same kind of thing. If you're considered an enemy of the state if you say or do certain things, and then by virtue of being an enemy of the state, the federal government is able to lock you up and hold you in prison without any recourse. And note the number of, quote, terrorists, end quote, that are being held in Guantanamo Bay now, going on over 20 years. This rivals anything that the Soviets did with the Gulag Archipelago.
Yeah. Yeah. I see the parallels as well. Yeah. It's concerning. So,
Very.
yeah. So I know, the second question and my other observation is that it seems to me that the taxpayers' money is being recycled by an astronomical defense budget, which goes to huge parts of the MIC. The MIC, at the other hand, donates a fair share of this money back to the political parties and to politicians directly. Is this observation right? And what does it mean for the average American?
I've used a meme on my blog, sonar21.com, more cowbell. There was an episode of Saturday Night Live, a comedy show in the United States from 30 years ago, I guess, where it simulated that the Blue Oyster Cult Band was playing a song, one of its famous songs, and
Yeah.
Christopher Walken was portraying a producer. And every time he came out, he said, "We need more cowbell. No matter what the band did, we need more cowbell." Well, that's our defense budget. It doesn't matter what happens in the world, we need more.
Yeah.
The Soviet Union collapsed. You'd think that this, oh, good, the Soviet Union's collapsed. You no longer have to maintain the level of vigilance. Oh, no, 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 no. Now the world's more dangerous. We need more money in the Defense Department. We got to fight the war on terror. So now we fought the war on terror, and there's one, oh, now we got to find a new enemy. Oh, guess what? Russia and China, they're the new enemy. They are a real serious threat. So we continue to expand this Department of Defense budget. It's now well over $800 billion. I've actually heard that if they really did some fair accounting, honest accounting, the number would be closer to $1.4 trillion dollars. So this is an enormous amount of money that's being wasted. And what is produced is an extremely expensive military with a very limited capability. I think many of your listeners and will have heard the phrase coming from Donald Trump and others that America has the greatest military in the world. Well, no, we don't. We have the most expensive military in the world. I describe it, it's like having a Lamborghini or a Ferrari, but you don't have any tires. So you've got this very expensive piece of equipment, but you really can't drive it anywhere or do anything with it.
Yeah, yeah, I see. But what is your opinion? What is the impact on the American taxpayer, on the citizens, on the average people?
It's completely skewed, distorted the economy, and as a result, you've got this level of corruption present in Washington. Because the defense contractors, they hire directly out of the Department of Defense, retiring generals and admirals, who then they use their access to their former, not just colleagues, but proteges, people that worked for them and that owe their positions within the Department of Defense, within the various military commands, to their mentor, that they will be amenable to doing what that mentor asked them to do, or steering contracts to them. And as a result, we've seen that just literally trillions of dollars have been wasted in places like Iraq and Afghanistan, and continued efforts to try to prop up useless military missions around the world, all the while that infrastructure, roads, railroads, conventional highways, water treatment facilities are deteriorating across the country and haven't been properly maintained. So it's really a situation in which the federal budget continues to grow. The debt burden that the government must service is astronomical, and it's going to lead to a direct fall in the standard of living. It's already started, and I think that's going to accelerate and worsen in the years to come.
That's a very, very ugly situation, indeed. Okay, I have two community questions now regarding America. The first one is from a guy from Russian. Kaplan, the grasshopper from Russia. So we need to frame this question because he's from Russia. He's asking, why do the Americans or the politicians have this big problem with Russia and with the Russians? That's a question from Russia.
I believe it's cultural. Cultural in the sense that the United States over the last few years has just radically embraced the so-called LGBTQ agenda. So it's basically we're in the thralls of a homosexual focus, all things are brought down to promoting and embracing homosexuality. Russia, by virtue of its both religious foundation within the Eastern Orthodox Church, as well as its policy actions, have rejected that, completely reject the West as a degenerate society. And that, I think, is at the foundation of a lot of this anger that's directed at Russia. It's cultural, it's moral. The other element is, and I've been thinking about trying to write a book in this regard to look at this. When was the moment that Western opinion turned against Vladimir Putin, and Putin became the symbol of all things evil with respect to Russia? He's portrayed as some great villain in this country. And yet when you look at Putin's actual actions, what he did was he stopped the oligarchs from raping Russia and turning it over to their Western partners. That was number one. Number two, he wasn't engaged with military adventures overseas. He was focused upon rebuilding Russian society, which had dramatically deteriorated under President Yeltsin, and restoring Russia really to a glory it has not seen in a couple of centuries. There was nothing in the Soviet Union that can compare with what Russia is today, both in terms of the beauty of architecture, the cleanliness of subway stations, the effectiveness of public transportation. And then on top of that, the goods that are available in the markets. So there's that jealousy part as well from the standpoint of the Americans. A third element is just flat out ignorance. The American public, by and large, are ignorant of history. They don't even know who their senator, the senator that represents them in the U.S. Congress, or their representative in the House of Representatives is. They're just largely ignorant of anything pertaining to public affairs. And when it comes to history, they've been inundated with propaganda from the media. I was doing some reading last night, going back over the period when Khrushchev took over from Stalin, and then there were some significant confrontations between the United States and the then Soviet Union, but particularly the Cuban Missile Crisis, the U.S. launching the Bay of Pigs operation in 1961, followed in 62 by the Cuban Missile Crisis. And yet throughout that period, Khrushchev would sit down and come to the United States and visit. There were exchanges, there were conversations, there was at least some measure of respect. The then Soviet Union was not treated as a pariah. Now the United States has embarked upon the campaign to just treat Ukraine as a leper. Russia as a leper, and completely reject all things. It's not just politics, but culture, sports, artists. I mean, it's absurd.
Yeah. For us outside observers from Europe and Eastern Europe, we can observe this conflict between the woke part of America and the traditional value part. This very sorry, it is unreal to observe. Yeah, but I know, I understand what you mean. So the next question, also from the community, and the last question from the American blog is how do you see the American society reacting after a defeat in Ukraine? Do you see an unsolvable split between the social groups, or will the country get over this mess?
It's going to come as a shock, and what I hope does not happen is that the conflict will escalate, and that there will be actual military strikes. Russia will carry out military strikes on military targets inside the continental United States. I think it does have the potential to escalate that far. Up to this point, the average American has been inundated with propaganda and told repeatedly that Russia's losing, Ukraine is winning, that we are prevailing, that NATO is united, and it's all a lie. So at some point when that lie is exposed because reality will intrude, there will be a natural shock and bewilderment in part from many Americans. How could this be? And then they'll have to come to grips with the fact that Russia has prevailed in the conflict, not just over Ukraine, but against all of NATO. And I do anticipate that NATO does not have good long-term options. NATO, I think, is facing the end of its existence as a result of this conflict.
Yeah, yeah. I'm also concerned about this escalation. I wrote about the possibility of, I don't know, just estimated 15%, but if it is 15%, it's like playing Russian roulette, and that's not a good outlook. If we are talking about nuclear war, it's absolutely not good.
Right.
Okay, let's go to the Ukraine part. The Ukrainian large-scale offensive in the south, or so-called counter-offensive in the south of Ukraine, has started since several days. Here I have several questions. Ukraine still tries to penetrate Russia's mobile defense zone, which is located in front of the first line of its layered defensive system. If the reports are true that Ukraine suffering catastrophic losses in men and material, some are talking about 25% of its offensive potential. Is there still a chance left that Ukraine could achieve a breakthrough at a Russian weak point, or has the Ukrainian offensive already failed and it is only being brought to its conclusion by both sides?
Yeah, it's failed. Look, let's take one possible scenario, that Ukraine somehow manages to reach the first line of Russian defense. I mean, they're still not there.
Yeah.
Once they hit that line, they then have to punch through that line, go to the next line of defense, punch through that, get through the third line of defense. So they've got to be able to advance over about a 20-mile band of entrenched defensive positions. They could possibly do this if they had mobile air defense, they had a robust fixed-wing combat aircraft, accompanied as well by rotary wing attack helicopters, that they had mobile artillery as well to move with the troops to shell Russian positions as the Ukrainian forces advanced. And on top of this, they had an actual logistics line that could continue to supply the ammunition, the vehicles that would be needed to be repaired and replaced, and the food to keep the troops alive. They don't have that. I mean, it's not my opinion. They simply do not have that. They might have the wherewithal to punch through in one weak spot, a pasture out in the middle of the steppe where there is no Russian forces, and claim great victory. Oh, look at what we've accomplished. But they do not have the ability to sustain an attack. They simply do not have it. Their air defense has been rendered almost completely inert. The Russians are able to use their combat aircraft, both fixed wing and rotary wing, at will. And as a consequence, hitting Ukrainian positions over and over and over. The vehicles that are being mangled on the battlefield, there's no easy replacement. And then on top of it, the real problem has been that the Ukrainian brigades that are operating have not been trained for what is described as inter-unit operability, that they have different brigades coordinate in terms of movement and attack. U.S. brigades, the training process that soldiers go through to learn that, usually takes at least 2 years. And even then, you get up to a level of competence that's not, that's minimal. Well, they now expect Ukraine to have achieved a level of competence after 3-4 months of training. And on top of it, they've been trained by different countries. Some have been trained by the UK, some by the French, some by the Germans, some by the Poles, some by the United States. Well, each, those units that were trained in the United States are going to operate differently than those that were trained in the United Kingdom, Great Britain, or those that were trained in Germany. So when you bring them together, they don't have a natural affinity that they can integrate and operate as a whole unit. So as a result, you've got basically different units operating in different places and using different tactics with different mindsets. And on top of that, then you have the chaos that's evident within the Ukrainian military command staff. Right now, the West has embarked, if you've paid attention, on a propaganda campaign eviscerating General Zaluzhny. They've started out saying, "Oh, he's the one. He's the one that ordered blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline." So the very credibility of Zaluzhny is under attack, not by the Russians, but by the Americans and the Brits and the Germans. And you go, well, how in the world can you launch a military, a very sophisticated, what's supposed to be sophisticated, coordinated military attack, when your allies are attacking and undermining your commander? So that does not promote any kind of integrity within the Ukrainian armed forces. So when you combine all of that, Ukraine simply does not have the ability to defeat Russia on the battlefield. They may find an isolated victory here or there. They may bloody up some Russian unit. They may even be able to reach some point on the first line of defense, but they're not going to be able to press that attack. It is, worth recalling what happened to the Nazis in World War II with Operation Barbarossa, launched in June of 1941, and it culminated with the German army running out of gas, essentially, at the gates of Moscow. That long line of logistics that required the ability to supply food, fuel, ammunition became impossible to sustain. And if you can't sustain that, then that military force that's up against an entrenched force simply loses its power to battle. That happened to the Nazis, and that's certainly happening to these neo-Nazis operating in Ukraine today.
Yeah, right. It almost sounds like outright murder to push these troops.
Yeah, no, I agree. It is. It's really it's a war crime in my view.
Yeah.
What's being done to these people?
Yes, I agree. Yeah. Okay. So the next point is President Putin gave an interview to several journalists a few days ago, and I picked out 4 statements from him, which I consider as very interesting, and I'd like to read it to you, and maybe you can give your opinion about those statements. So let's go to statement number 1. Russia will consider creating a sanitary zone on the territory of Ukraine in case the shelling of our regions continues. A sanitary zone will be created on the territory of Ukraine. Such a zone is needed in order to secure our regions. Work on this issue will soon begin. What is your opinion?
Yeah, no, I think I was very impressed. Putin really is a remarkable leader. He does not indulge what I call the cult of personality. He's very sort of pragmatic, down to earth, a little reminiscent, if you will, of Khrushchev in terms of being a man of the people without the crude brash nature of Khrushchev, just the opposite. He's a very cool customer. And, I think they're not looking necessarily to militarily occupy all of Ukraine, but if necessary, in order to stop the shelling of Russian territories, both the old and the newly incorporated territories, they'll do so. I think the most important element of what came out of Putin's remarks is that he's deferring that this operation is now fully in the hands of the military commanders. That the political considerations, which may have limited Russian responses in the past, I think those are no longer operative. And that's why he's talking about the need to get a sanitary zone that will end the shelling of civilians in Russian territory. That has been ongoing now for 9 years, and the West has been completely silent with respect to this outrageous human right abuse.
Yeah. The question is how far this escalator is going. So the second statement is, do we need to march on Kiev? If yes, we need a new mobilization. If not, we do not need it. There is no need for mobilization right now.
Yeah, I don't think they need to mobilize at this point. I think Russia has been holding several of its forces in reserve, and let's not forget, there is a significant Russian presence in Belarus right now, working in concert with the Belarusian army, that they can represent a threat on Kiev, driving from the north at a time when Kiev's got all of its forces diverted to the south and to the east. So Russia has lots of options that has not even begun to play. It's not on the defensive. Ukraine is absolutely on the defensive, trying to. It no longer has the ability to shoot down any Russian missiles in any kind of number. Their defense system's been degraded. Their ability to conduct long-range attacks upon Russia are, nil. The drone attack that hit the Kremlin was nothing. It's just not consequential. So I think at some point it may be necessary to take Kiev. If I was with the Russian General Staff and advising them, the plan I would try to follow is looking to foment a coup within the Ukrainian military. Once the Ukrainian military realizes they're just being used as a proxy for slaughter, and that their lives are being needlessly sacrificed, they may finally come to grips and say, we can't continue to be used this way, and get rid of Zelensky and Budanov and the other political hacks, and then take control. That way, Russia would have an assurance that they would not have to go in and fight street battles in Kiev, and then return Ukraine to a neutral state, no longer a ward of the West, dependent entirely on NATO.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Yeah. Okay, so the third point is Ukraine should not exist at the expense of the Russian Federation and on the historical Russian territories if normal relations are not built.
Yeah, what's so bizarre? Again, I'm not a great historian with respect to Russia. However, Nikita Khrushchev, who led, the Soviet Union during that critical period following the death of Stalin, up until the rise of Leonid Brezhnev in was it 64, 65. Khrushchev was a Ukrainian, born in Ukraine. He ran the Communist Party in Kiev.
Yeah. So
this union between the old Soviets and Russia and Ukraine, I mean, this was nothing of this current development we have, where Ukraine is trying to pretend that it's this unique nation, complete and distinct from Russia. It's a fantasy. It is the same kind of thing that you see in the West, where all these people declare that they're transgender. They deny biological sex. They deny the biological reality of male and female. They pretend that there's something else. Well, Ukraine is a transgender country in that sense, trying to pretend that it's something that it is not, ignoring its long-standing close ties with Russia, ignoring the fact that Khrushchev was the one who gave Ukraine many of the benefits that it insists and claims now. Oh, Crimea belongs to us. No, it doesn't. That was Khrushchev turned that over to Ukraine back because he could. But in fact, Crimea was a long-standing part of Russia. And without understanding that part of history, that old saying that those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And the Ukrainians, I think what Russia is looking to do, that's where they talked about demilitarizing, denazifying, is to erase or at least make it eliminate those in positions of power who have pushed this nonsense.
Yeah, of course. So the last point, the last statement from President Putin is further direction of the SMO will depend on the outcome of the counterattack by the AFU.
Right. Well, I think what General Surovikin is playing a very significant role in this, the Russian response. They're not sure. Well, let me change it. I am highly confident that Russia knows exactly how many brigades, how many tanks, how many artillery pieces, how many armored vehicles. I put a lot of stock in Russia's professionalism when it comes to collecting human intelligence. I think Russia has penetrations in both the Ukrainian General Staff and NATO headquarters, so that they have access to knowing what are the military plans and intentions of the West. And they're not going to, certainly the Russians aren't going to tip their hands and say, oh yeah, we know what you're going to do. But they know where to strike, when to strike, what to prepare for. And I think it would appear that their plan is to let the Ukrainians, like an ocean wave crashing against a seawall, to destroy themselves and crashing against the Russian defended positions. And in the process of destroying themselves, will eliminate the ability of Ukraine to sustain military operations. This current military force in Ukraine represents really the third army that has been built from scratch. And each iteration of the Ukrainian army, from generation 1 to generation 2 and now generation 3, is less capable, less skilled, less experienced than its predecessor. That is what I think people need to really latch onto and appreciate, that the Ukraine is now, like a crack addict, a drug addict, totally dependent upon the fix that they're getting from NATO, from the United States. Without financial aid, without military equipment, ammunition, vehicles, Ukraine would be out of the fight by the end of the week.
Yeah. The topic about human intelligence, this is a question I will have later, but it's a good point. And I also think this alleged leaks of Jack Teixeira, I think you did the best analysis about this, is maybe not aimed on the Russians, because they have anyway the data, but
Right.
there is another audience for this. But I will come later to the human intelligence point. I have a last question about Ukraine. The Russians are taking also yeah, more or less huge casualties, not like the Ukrainians. I have some numbers. I don't know whether they are true or not. The Ukrainians lost some 10 to 12,000 people in this offensive, and the Russians maybe 1,000 for now. I don't know whether they are true or not, but let's take it as a basis. Um, 1,000 is a lot for the Russians. The question is it more positive for the Russians to defend in this mobile defense zone, or would it be better for them to withdraw to the defense lines? And why are they not doing it? Is it because of political reasons, geopolitics? What is your opinion?
No, I think the Russians, just from what I've been able to observe, I'd love to have full access to the intelligence order of battle to see exactly what units are doing or where they're situated, how they're operating, how they're maneuvering. But Russia's strategy throughout this special military operation has been to minimize its own casualties. So they've made heavy use of artillery and heavy use of tanks, with last resort is using assault troops to take a position. As a result of that, in a complete contradiction of conventional military wisdom, the conventional military assumption is that an attacking force must have at least a 3 to 4 times advantage over the defending force, because the defending force, by virtue of being entrenched, will inflict a lot more casualties. What we've seen so going back to a year ago, February, the Russians have completely flipped that script. Even though the Russians have been attacking defended positions for the most part over the last 14 months, or now going on 16 months, they've done so with incurring a minimal number of casualties, and they've not been afraid to withdraw from tactically vulnerable positions, as Surovikin ordered the retreat of Russian forces from Kherson last fall, on the assumption that if the dam upriver was burst, as it did happen, it could have potentially trapped tens of thousands of Russian troops on the other side of the river with no easy access to resupply them or to rescue them. So, very smart on Surovikin's part, anticipating that. The realities of numbers are that Ukraine is, its total population is now maybe 30 million, maybe 25 million. Russia's 6 times that. So let's say that if you put them both side by side, and Russia loses 2,000 and Ukraine loses 2,000, well, the math means Ukraine's going to run out of men well before Russia does. So I have not seen any evidence to suggest that the Russian losses are creating political problems for Putin. The losses in Ukraine definitely are creating political problems, which is one of the reasons there have been extensive efforts to try to cover up the exact scale of those losses. So Russia's strategy of, creating a meat grinder that Ukrainian forces are forced to confront, I think has proven to be effective, and is, diminishing the operational capability of the Ukrainian army with each passing day.
Yeah. Okay, I understand. Thank you. So I would go over now to the next topic. It is intelligence, and since you have extensive experience in intelligence, and also you trained some people from the special forces. My first question is the following. At the Orehovo or Tokmak front section, Ukraine ran into two Spetsnaz brigades, I think the 22nd and the 45th, at the beginning of the offensive. As far as I know, Spetsnaz is not part of any defensive doctrine from the Russians. I don't know, but I think it is not. They have far more specialized tasks. Do you think there could be do you think there could have been intelligence information to the Russians and they pulled together the Spetsnaz to deliver a high impact trap to destroy the major part of the Ukrainian offensive potential, or does it have other reasons?
Oh yeah, no, I think it's clear that there's intelligence information being obtained from Ukraine. Uh, so when you look at how do we collect, the goal of intelligence is, like in your case, so I don't know you, Alex, so I want to find out everything about you. Well, what do I want to do? Well, ideally, I'd like to intercept all of your phone conversations, take all that information, so I'd know who you are talking to, what you're saying. But I wouldn't really know what you are actually saying and doing in the privacy of your own home. So I'd want to get a human asset that would be that you'd welcome into your home and that you'd talk to, and so I'd find out exactly what you're saying behind closed doors. Those are the two major means of collecting information on other people and on other countries. So, take that with respect to Ukraine. We want to know, that the Russians, I'm sure, are collecting any kind of electronic communication, be it phone call, text message, email, that goes from any of the people that work for Volodymyr Zelensky and Zaluzhny and across the board. All those communications be intercepted, decrypted, analyzed. Uh, then on top of it, you'd actually want to get a human source inside so that they could, be seen as a trusted advisor. And so you would know exactly what the Ukrainians are thinking or planning to do. Now, you're always up against, you've got to find a way to vet, to review and validate that intelligence to make sure that they are not directing a disinformation campaign at you to fool you. But when you compare Ukrainian intelligence capabilities with Russian, I would say the Russian capabilities dramatically exceed anything that Ukraine can field. I've also believed that that's been one of the reasons up to this point that Russia has been reluctant to target military and political headquarters in Kiev, because they actually have human sources within those organizations, and that if they did attack them, they'd run the risk of killing their source. So it's always better to not blind yourself, but to have the information flowing. There may come a point at which they've recognized that they've done everything they can do, they've collected everything that they can, and that they will, alert their sources to escape, and that, so we could see that coming down the pike possibly.
Yes, okay. You basically answered my second question already, so let's skip that. Okay, the next one. What do you think is the potential impact of the destruction of the GUR, this intelligence headquarters in Kiev, without any speculation whether Budanov is dead or not? Does the destruction of the infrastructure and the specialists will have any impact on the Ukrainian intelligence activities, or are the real headquarters and the decision makers located somewhere outside Kiev?
No, I think it's clearly disrupted the intelligence operations of Ukraine. I'm sure they moved to try to reconstitute those and relocate them. But that destruction of that headquarters, I think, was significant. What the West is doing a pretty effective job of covering up so far are the number of U.S., British, German, Polish intelligence officers that were also killed or wounded in that attack, as well as other foreign mercenaries who are actual active duty military personnel that are inside Ukraine operating equipment on behalf of the Ukrainian army simply because Ukraine doesn't have trained personnel to operate the Patriot batteries, is one example. So I think that was a serious blow, and I would anticipate that Russia will continue to try to take out these kinds of command locations. It's worth noting that since that attack, we've not had any further attempts to launch drone attacks on civilian targets inside of Russia or high-profile political targets like the Kremlin.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Okay. So the next question is, last year in Kharkov, the Russians seem to have been surprised by the Ukrainian offensive, where Russia eventually withdraw. How is such an event to be explained, as opposed to the current, knowledge about the about the offensive plans from the Ukrainians and so on?
Yeah, I think that was probably an intelligence failure by the Russians. They may have assumed that they didn't levy the right kind of collection requirements to gather the information that would give them a full view of the battlefield. It is important to note that they were not driven out per se. It was more of a tactical withdrawal, recognizing that the territorial defense, the military police, who were their frontline personnel there, were incapable of holding on. But still, I think Russia did not properly anticipate the Ukrainians mounting that kind of offensive. I don't think the Russians are in a position to make that kind of mistake again. I think they've shown a remarkable ability, in my view, to learn from previous errors and mistakes. But again, it did not change the strategic outcome of this war.
Yes.
It gave Ukraine some temporary bragging rights, but that's it. Because most of what they were taking was just open farmland, and that doesn't win you a war.
Yeah, yeah, and this leads me to to the next question. I had the feeling that at the beginning of the, let's call it SMO, Special Military Operation, the Russians haven't set up all their assets, properly to wartime, like intelligence, like air defense, like all these assets had failures at the beginning, and they adjusted it, and they improved it and improved it, and I think they are today full on wartime configuration. How was it in the you worked in the CIA? Have there been also such a plan, if there is a war, to mobilize the CIA to expand the intelligence capabilities? Do you know what I mean?
Well, yeah. So the ability of the CIA to expand and conduct human intelligence operations is extremely limited. Number one, you would have to put personnel over in Europe, Eastern Europe, Poland, Ukraine, ideally Russia if you could, or other countries where Russians are active. And then, it takes a while to cultivate human sources. The problem the West has now is we're a veritable freak show. They are hiring people into the CIA not because they are skilled with language, not because they've lived in a particular country and know the culture, but because of how they identify sexually, whether they claim to be a mountain goat, or the whole transgender madness. And I guarantee you there are case officers. The case officers are the intelligence officers who go overseas to try to recruit foreign spies. You got guys pretending to be women, women pretending to be men, and when they go into some of these cultures, particularly, let's say Russia, any Russian man or woman is going to look at this and be repulsed by it. Now, part of being a good spy is that you've got to have the kind of personality that you interact well with people, that you read social cues, and that you can actually develop a relationship and get that relationship to a point where you can convince that man or woman to work with you, to give you information that they know they shouldn't be giving you. Well, that's sort of a art of seduction, but it's not sexual seduction. It is seduction in the sense of convincing you to, on the basis of, and to share with me information that otherwise would get you killed as a traitor. So, at this point, the CIA is in an extremely limited position to exploit that because of its whole social justice focus. Instead of being focused upon, well, for example, they say, oh, well, we need to make sure that we send a black guy into Kiev. Well, or a black woman. Sorry, but they're going to stand out. You don't have a large number of people of African origin running around Kiev or Moscow. They stand out, and one of the hallmarks of an excellent intelligence officer is you don't stand out. You're boring. You blend in with the scenery. That nobody, you become sort of the nowhere man. So I don't see any immediate plan or possible plan on the part of the CIA to do anything. Now, I do know that early on, as the Russians were mobilizing their forces, and then when they launched the operation, there was some genuine concern that Russia was not using its frontline troops, its frontline personnel. And there was sort of a wonderment, why? Why were they holding back? So, I think Russia has held significant reserves in potential preparation for dealing with NATO counteroffensive, not a Ukrainian counteroffensive, but a NATO counteroffensive. I think that is still one possibility. It will be a failed military operation, but Russia, I think, is now wisely anticipating that as one viable possibility.
Okay, I see. In such a case, or no, let me ask the question: do you see a possibility that what Mr. Rasmussen, the former NATO General Secretary, said recently, that there is a possibility that Poland and the Baltics and maybe Romanians, that they could enter the war without NATO coverage? Is there a possibility, or is it only talk from him?
I think it's foolish talk. They don't have the ability to enter and sustain the operation with any hope of victory. They'll set themselves up for destruction. Now, maybe their plan is to enter the war in order to allow Article 5 of NATO to come into effect, in order to force the hand of the United States, of the United Kingdom, France, and Turkey. See, Turkey is the interesting wild card in here. Not many people are paying much attention to it. It has really the second largest army in NATO. So without Turkey, NATO's military punch is very, very limited. And I don't see Turkey having any stomach for wanting to get involved with a shooting war with Russia at this point. I think Turkey sees having positive diplomatic relations with Russia is more in its interest.
Yep, I agree. So I have three questions left. I have two community questions now. Question number one is someone who say he's from a cave from Cheyenne in the United States. So he's asking, is the CIA nowadays fully committed to work for the US national security? Judging by some of its actions, one would conclude that it brings the world closer to a nuclear confrontation, which would not be beneficial to anyone.
Well, I'm not sure. The CIA, I think people have the wrong perception of the CIA as a independent actor out doing things on its own without regards to what are the directions from uh, the politicians. It's very much an establishment organization. It is true it worked to undermine Donald Trump, but again, it was playing to the establishment elements in Washington. So um, uh, the CIA, in fact, I think there is evidence that there is some dissent within the ranks of the Central Intelligence Agency. Some of those officers came forward to Seymour Hersh, the journalist, to give up the plan and the action that was carried out in destroying the Nord Stream pipeline. So you've got that. I also think that the elements of the Jack Teixeira leak were a cry for help by some members of the intelligence community within the CIA who wanted to expose the lies of the Biden administration and Biden's Department of Defense, who kept insisting that the war in Ukraine was going well and that we were going to defeat the Russians. The opposite. It was just the opposite was the case, and the information that was leaked out of the Jack Teixeira accounts helped expose that.
Yeah, yeah. I already announced it. I wanted to ask you about your newest, I don't know, opinion about the Jack Teixeira case.
Mm-hmm.
Is there something new? Do you have developed new conclusions about this? Because I know you did by far the best analysis about this case.
But nothing new per se, other than I did note of a couple of weeks back the fact that the FBI in its submission to the judge lied. They flat out lied about the quote weapons that were found in Jack Teixeira's bedroom. These so-called weapons are what are called airsoft guns. They're not real firearms. They look like real firearms, but they have an orange tip in them because they're used to shoot a round plastic ball, and it's used by usually guys that are 18 to 23, 24 years of age. They dress up in military garb. They put on eye protection because you don't want to get hit in the eye with one of these things, and then maybe a face guard because it can bruise you. And then they run around the woods and shoot at each other with these things, playing war. So it is, but it's not a real firearm, and yet the FBI in its submission to the judge declared these as real firearms. I mean, so when you're seeing that kind of lying by the Department of Justice, it lets you know that there's some other agenda on the table. Coupled with the fact that I keep seeing these stories with Washington Post, the New York Times reporting on, oh, there's a new trove of documents that was posted. They're the only ones seeing this stuff. If you go to Discord and try to search for these documents on your own, you're not going to find them. So the fact that the intelligence community is controlling them, controlling their release, indicates to me that there is a broader political purpose at work, where they're trying to, they have a different agenda.
Yeah, okay, I see. My last prepared question for you is now outside the intelligence part, but since I am a Serb, I want to sneak it in. It's regarding Serbia.
Mm-hmm.
Within Serbia, there is one of the biggest US military bases of Europe. I'm talking about Camp Bonsteel.
Right.
how much can you tell us about this base, and what is it? What is its purpose? Did you have any personal involvement with it? And the second question is, what is the what is the long-term prospect that it could eventually be withdrawn?
Well, personally, I've had no experience at that base, nor have I been into any of the former Yugoslavia, into either Serbia, Bosnia. Um, so that is sort of outside my purview. The presence of that base is there so that you have a force present that can facilitate the deployment of U.S. troops if they decide to intervene once again in the internal affairs of Serbia. I think what I've seen over the last month have been deliberate efforts by NATO, by the United States, to try to provoke an escalation in that conflict. I think the view from the West is that this can be used to distract Russia from its military activities in Ukraine. So it's it's just a reminder that the United States, we like to accuse Russia of being an imperial power meddling in other countries. But the only country that has consistently been meddling and conducting military operations without congressional authorization in other countries is the United States.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, thank you for that. I have a question. There is one last thing which many people asked me that I asked you, but I'm struggling to do it. It's about 9/11. Is it
Oh
okay
yeah,
for you? Or
sure,
okay,
sure.
okay. Because many people asked me to ask this, so I will bring the question. I will read it. Um, Given to his high security clearance, he was in a position to evaluate the official narrative of 9/11 better
Yeah.
than most Americans. What are his takes on who potentially orchestrated the 9/11?
Well, I think 9/11 was. I have no doubt that Bin Laden and Al Qaeda carried this out. But what it what made it possible was the breakdown of the bureaucracy, or what is the bureaucracy in Washington D.C. When the George W. Bush administration came into office, uh, they shut down any effort to look at the issue of the terrorist threat that was presented by Al Qaeda. If you recall, up to that point, Al Qaeda was implicated in the simultaneous attacks on the U.S. embassies in Tanzania and Kenya a year previously, or 2 years previously, as well as the attack on the USS Stark, I believe, that was off the coast of Yemen. I wrote an op-ed along with Milt Bearton in November of 2000, just before the presidential election, saying that regardless of who was elected, whether it was Al Gore or George W. Bush, that it would be important for the new administration to focus upon two individuals, Imad Mughniyeh and Osama bin Laden, for their roles in conducting terrorist activities. Now, I wasn't suggesting that this was an existential threat to the United States by any means, but they were intent upon attacking U.S. interests, and part of that was the U.S. was seen as unfairly meddling in Saudi Arabia. So when the Bush administration came in, I know that Richard Clarke gave a very detailed memo to Condoleezza Rice, the National Security Advisor for George W. Bush, about what needed to be done on combating the terrorism front. And they ignored it. They completely discarded that paper. And then under Cheney, their focus was up on building up a missile defense, ostensibly to defend against nuclear missile attacks out of Iran. Now, the reality was, and recall this gets back into relations with Russia, George W. Bush walked away in 2001 from the anti-ballistic missile treaty, walked away unilaterally, which ended up being a boon for Russia because it allowed Russia to develop a very robust anti-ballistic missile defense system. So from from January when Bush was inaugurated through August, attempts. There was clear evidence that something was getting ready to happen. People like Cofer Black went to the White House repeatedly to brief and to warn, and they were ignored. And I don't hold fond affections for Cofer Black, but they were not trying to, they saw the red lights flashing, let's say. And even the presidential daily brief that presented to Bush in August talked about the prospects of an attack inside the United States by bin Laden. The first time that they chaired a meeting of this interagency counterterrorism committee that would bring representatives from the State Department, from my old office, from CIA, from the Department of Defense. The first time that meeting was convened was on September 10th, the day before 9/11. So what was going on is the Bush administration ignored all of the warning signs. And then when it happened, when the attacks happened and they recognized they were culpable, because they could have done some things to prevent this, they embarked upon a massive cover-up to pretend that nobody could have known, and to divert attention away from the actual incompetence. They'd just completely taken their eye off the ball. Now, I've listened with fascination to the various people that think the towers were brought down with a controlled explosion. The people saying this have no experience working with those kinds of systems. I do. I've got good friends who are in that industry. There's no way you can go into a building the size of World Trade Center 1, 2, or 7 and wire the columns with the necessary explosives without it being completely evident. You would not be able to cover it up. You would not be able to hide it. There's no way to do this surreptitiously. So, this was a case where the folks that carried out the 9/11 attack, they had an audacious vision. They succeeded. Remember when they launched they had actually had plans going back to 1993, 94 to bring down 5 jetliners in a coordinated attack called Operation Bojinka. That was disrupted ultimately with the capture of Ramzi Youssef. I know there's a lot of that people look for a meaning in 9/11. In my view, the Bush administration was culpable. They could have prevented it, but they failed to prevent it, not because they wanted it to happen, but because they were stupid, lazy, and focused on something else.
Wow, that was very detailed. I don't know whether such informations were communicated yet. It was very detailed. Thank you. Okay, that was my last question. So at this point, I want to thank you very much for your time. And moreover, just a few informations for my viewers. Initially, I wanted to ask Larry at the first 10 minutes something about his career. But 2 days ago, I saw a report on RT. I think the Whistleblowers Report is the name. I will link it in the YouTube description box, and I will put it onto my website. It is very interesting. I think you will learn everything about Larry's career. It's very, very interesting. So I had more time here for other questions. Moreover, I want to encourage everyone to visit his webpage. It's sonar21.com. Or his other channels like Telegram, but I will link everything in the description box and on my webpage. So thank you very much. I learned a lot today.
Well, thank you, Alex. I'm honored to have had the chance to chat with you, and I appreciate the invitation.
Yeah. Okay. So goodbye. See you next time.